Hey drawing nerds, I'm Sarah Watts and welcome to my YouTube channel. This is the first video in my floral drawing series. Today we'll be learning a little bit about 3 objects that I recommend you get to know before tackling drawing realistic flowers. It's a little bit nerdy, a little bit of drawing foundation, and a little bit of sketching. But it's gonna be super fun, so don't worry. Alright, let's get started. A quick rundown on the supplies I'm using. You really just need a pencil and some computer paper or scrap paper, and if you have a small plate, a teacup, and an orange, that is great. So for my pencil, I'm using the Tombow Mono pencil in B. These pencils are great, they don't smudge, and I will link it below. I have a discount code for you. Then I have the Rhodia paper pad, and this is very beautiful smooth paper. It's great for calligraphy, but I'm using it for this to sketch on. Then we have a saucer, we have a teacup, and we have a clementine orange. But really, you don't actually need these specifically. These are just what I have. You can use a bowl instead of a teacup. You can use a regular cup. Really, you just need something that is a drinking vessel. And then some kind of orange. I like this because it's small and I can hold it and they're delicious. And then some kind of plate. It can be a saucer, a tiny plate, a big plate, whatever you have. It's just nice to have these smaller objects so that you can have them in one hand and kind of look at them and see what they're doing in space. In outer space. Okay, so the first thing that we're getting into to draw the basic shapes that I spoke about earlier is a little bit of perspective. We won't go too crazy into it, but it's really helpful to know very basics of perspective so that you know what you're looking for when you're drawing things from life. So perspective is basically like how you see things in space. So when you're looking straight on, this is called the eye level, right? Ooh, that's so good. Okay. And then when you're looking up at an object, that's called worm's eye view, right? So just think of, if you have a worm and he's looking up with some laser beam eyes. And so when you look up at an object, that's when you'll start to see the underside of it. So that's really important to know when you're drawing things from life is, am I looking at it from eye level or worm's eye view? And then the final one is bird's eye view. What will this bird look like? All right, so when you're looking at something from bird's eye view, you're looking at it from the overhead view. So you'll start to see the tops of things. So as you move from eye level and you start going up, like you're taking off like a bird, you'll start to see the top of an object. And as you go down, like a worm, you'll start to see the underside of an object. So bird's eye view, eye level, worm's eye view. And that'll just kind of help you to determine, how you're seeing something, and it'll kind of help you understand, should I draw the bottom part of this or the top part? Or am I looking at it straight on? And yeah. So that's super helpful, and that will kind of inform some of the things that we'll go over a little bit in this video. Okay, so let's move on to the first kitchen object. The first object that I want you to get familiar with is a saucer. You can call it a flying saucer or a tiny plate or a baby plate, whatever suits your fancy. But basically, a saucer, if you look at it from the top, you see a circle, okay? If you look at it from eye level on the side, then you see this squatted kind of bowl shape. And this will vary depending on what your saucer looks like. If it's a flying saucer, then it might look something like this. And then if you look at the bottom, you see a circle again. Now my favorite view is the 3/4 view. So you have the side view, and then see how that ellipse is starting to show. And it's not a full circle when you're looking at it from 3/4 view. It's more like an ellipse shape, right? And then as you bring it to the top view, it becomes a circle again. So 3/4 view will be helpful because right now I'm looking at, from a bird's eye view, the top of this object. And so I know that I'm looking for, you know, the center of the flower, if you're drawing a flower. And, you know, you'll be seeing the top sides of the petals. But then if I look at the bottom 3/4 view of this plate, then I'll see the bottom here, or if it's a flower, you'll see the sepals and then the stem coming out. And then the petals will be curving back into space that way. How a circle becomes an ellipse has to do with perspective. Now, a really cool thing with perspective that's also super frustrating if you're starting out is a thing called foreshortening. And I think that is something that will really explain why, you know, petals kind of look different when they get close to you. So foreshortening is basically when something gets smaller as it recedes into space. And it basically is going off into space into a vanishing point. So everything has a vanishing point, and it's basically the point in which the object would disappear if it kept going back into space. And when you have this awesome sauce, you'll see that when this side of the saucer comes towards you, then you stop seeing this back end, and if this was a flower, these petals would look kind of squished and they would be bigger, right? So let's just pretend that's a flower, okay? Now, as you start to see the backside again, then you'll create an ellipse, and these petals will appear smaller, and then as they come forward, they might kind of start flipping up, and you might start seeing the underside of them. And that's called foreshortening. So basically, things that are closer to you are larger, and the distance from the front to the back will become squished so that it appears that it's going back into space. And these sides will remain the same width. Now, all those rules change a little bit when you get more into, you know, multiple vanishing points and stuff like that. But for now, that's the basics. And that, for me, is the most helpful thing to know when you're drawing flowers because, yeah, like sometimes a petal goes from looking like a teardrop shape to this squished shape that you can't really define. And you're like, what is happening? And it's because of foreshortening. Okay, so the next household or kitchen item on our list is a teacup, or, you know, you can use a cup or a bowl, anything like that. I've got multiple vessels here. What I really love about using a teacup to get familiar with drawing flowers is that it has multiple things going on that really help you to draw like different views of a flower. So again, like I said before, when we're drawing things from life, the goal is to simplify things into super easy shapes. And so for me, when I draw flowers, I typically find, you know, saucers, teacups, and spheres. So the teacup is really cool because when you look at the top view of the teacup, you see the circle. Let's grab this one. This is a better example for that. So when you see the top view, here's your circle. And then when you see the bottom, it's a little bit smaller, right? But when you look at it from the side, this bottom part is almost the same size as the top, right? It's got a slight size variation. But when you see it from the top, that bottom's a lot smaller. And that is when you see foreshortening and perspective really come into play. So here's the top of that teacup, and it's slowly going back into space, and then eventually it'll meet its vanishing point. So that's really cool because you kind of see how perspective plays into a teacup. So when you look at the side view of this teacup, you see this shape, right? And sometimes, you know, you'll even see like your cup might be this shape. It might be more like a vase. You might see a tall cup. You might see a really cone-shaped cup. Like maybe you're eating a snow cone and you're checking out the cone of your snow cone. I don't know which kind of cup you're drawing. But anyway, all of these shapes sort of imitate the shapes of different flowers. So when you do the 3/4 view of this cup, again, you see that ellipse. And then this edge right here will imitate this one. So they, like, these two lines are parallel, and they stay parallel when they go back into space. So that's something that a lot of people get wrong, is some of these lines will end up like this, and it's like, oh no, it doesn't change when it goes back into space. So just keep in mind that that kind of parallel line stays parallel with that one, and that will really help you, you know, if you're looking at something in a more extreme perspective, that'll really help you to see how that object goes back into space in a more exaggerated way. You're like, Sarah, why are you showing us how to draw cups? But if you think about it, this is a lot like how a flower grows, right? So when you have a cup and you tilt it, you stop seeing this inside part, right? And again, that's the same thing with this flower. I no longer see that center. Maybe I'll see a tiny bit of it, but as I keep tilting it, I stop seeing that. And that's really important, because a lot of times when people draw flowers from a 3/4 view, right, they'll end up putting the center up here. And you're like, wow, that looks like a levitating ghost center, because really it should be down here, and these petals are covering it up. So that's what's really useful about, you know, taking simple objects and really just paying attention to what happens to them as you move them around in space. When we go to do the worm's eye view of this cup, you'll see the bottom side, and again, this edge is still parallel with this one, right? And so if you see a flower that's pointing away from you, and then you see the little sepals and the stem. See, those petals have a place to end when you have these simple shapes that kind of keep them contained. And the final household item that you may or may not have is an orange or a little clementine. This is a really helpful shape to get to know when you're drawing flowers. So you have your top side view of this clementine, right? And it looks a bit, when you're looking at it directly from the top, it looks a bit like this, right? And there's probably more lines, but it looks like that. So these lines, when you're looking at it directly straight on from the top at eye level, the lines appear pretty straight. And as you start to tilt that sphere or clementine or orange or beach ball, you'll see that these straight lines start to form a shape. And when you're drawing with no shading, the curve of a line can really inform the shape of an object. So that's super helpful when you're drawing flowers, because, you know, the petals are going to form around this when they're doing, you know, when they're still buds. So that's why this is super helpful, is because this is very similar to the bud of a flower. And even if it's like a lily, where it's like a more elongated bud, you're still kind of having that same clementine beach ball shape, but it's being stretched, right? So here's the top view, and then a 3/4 view where we're starting to see just part of the top of this clementine would look something like this. And I love this because once, I'm not looking at the same view that you are. All right. So that's kind of what you see, right? So this could be the bud of a flower. And it also, if you were to cut the top off of these shapes, you could start to see how a flower might follow that form, and then, you know, the center of the flower would be under here. And that's really helpful too, is if you kind of need to have the sketch of the base and the top, I would put it in there and then you can just erase it. But you'll just keep in mind that whatever's in front is going to overlap whatever's behind. So you won't see this line, you know, these lines are not going to show up down here because these petals are covering them up. So, and then again, to the side of the clementine, you'll see maybe like a straight line when you're looking, you know, at the eye level view of this clementine from the side. This line appears straight, but then as it comes around that shape, those lines become curved. And so you're starting to see like a pumpkin or the side view of a flower or the side of a clementine. Hey, hey. So when you put these three things together, it's super helpful, and I feel like most flowers follow this rule. You have some flowers like birds of paradise and some forms of orchids that are just having their own party. But these techniques still help those kinds of flowers, because I don't remember what a bird of paradise looks like from memory, but I bet there's some kind of cylinder shape thing happening. Like you could still use these shapes to kind of break down a bird of paradise flower, right? And maybe he has an eye and some teeth. When you're learning drawing, basic shapes are what you're looking for. And whether they're rectangles or squares or cylinders or spheres, you just want to kind of find those basic shapes and then build off of that. So the last thing I want to show you is how those basic shapes kind of play into real flowers. So if you see this tulip, the top view, you know, you have your circle, and then you can kind of see the center, the pistil and the stamens kind of surrounding it. And those petals are very much foreshortened. They're you're seeing the large top edge of these kind of folding over. And then as they go into space, some of the bases of them disappear for a second and then come back in when they get to the center. So that's when that teacup shape was helpful. Same thing with the side. This kind of applies the, well, let's do a 3/4 view where we see a little bit of the top like a bird would. So here's the top of that teacup, the base. This line's still parallel with this one, even though they're both slightly curved. And then you've got your petals that are kind of informed by those clementine shapes that we learned. So you're combining that clementine with that teacup concept to create the 3/4 view of a tulip. And then the side view, again, you've got, this is why I have to sketch it first, sketch out the basic shape, Sarah. This is what you're teaching. And then you do the petals that are overlapping that center petal, and you've got the side view. Now, if you do the 3/4 view from the worm's eye perspective, which I cannot see, but I'm going to guess, that top side of the tulip might look slightly, it's going back into space, so it's going to look slightly smaller than the base, right? And then you've got your petals. It's more of an S curve. Okay. And then the base, where that stem comes in. Okay. So that's how those simple shapes play into an actual flower. And I'm just going to show you this little pom-pom daisy, how this really applies that clementine technique where you're seeing how these petals form around this sphere. You got your eye level, top view, bottom view, and then worm's eye 3/4, bird's eye 3/4. And then here you've got, this is more following that saucer shape. So you've got some really foreshortened larger petals in the front, the sepals, the stem, maybe some leaves, little bee having a party, woohoo! And that is the side view of this daisy. And then when you do the 3/4, you still see some foreshortened petals in here. And then these petals are a little bit smaller going back into space. Okay. For homework, I want you to practice one flower in a top view, a side view, and a 3/4 view. And you can do the bird's eye 3/4 view and the worm's eye 3/4 view. But practice doing an actual flower. Now, one of the flowers that you'll probably see a lot right now is the daffodil. This one's awesome because it actually has a saucer and a teacup, right? So the teacup's kind of sitting on the saucer. They're having a little cup of tea, hanging out in the flower world. And so I think a daffodil would be a great place to start. Awesome. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little rundown of a tiny bit of perspective, a little bit of birds and worms and eyeballs. So stay tuned for the next video where we'll draw an actual flower.